I wrote every single line of code in the dark to build the tech empire that put my husband on magazine covers. But when he callously threw me away for a pregnant heiress on the exact night of our wedding anniversary, he forgot one fatal detail about the system running his entire life. He might be the face of our multi-million-dollar company, but I am the architect. I hold the kill switch. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. I am Kylie Barnes, and tonight was supposed to be the absolute pinnacle of my career. For 5 long years, I had written every single line of code in the dark, surviving on stale coffee and 3 hours of sleep a night. I built the complex predictive algorithms that transformed Artisan Technologies from a pipe dream in a dingy garage into a multi-million-dollar tech empire. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was currently bathed in a magnificent golden hue, buzzing with the absolute elite of Silicon Valley and top-tier Wall Street investors. I had personally overseen every detail of this massive gala to launch our breakthrough software. It was an undeniable triumph. To add a layer of poetic perfection to the evening, tonight was also my wedding anniversary. 7 years of marriage to Nolan Hayes. Nolan looked every inch the brilliant tech visionary as he confidently stepped up to the main podium. He wore a sharp, custom-tailored midnight blue tuxedo, his jawline perfectly angled to catch the relentless barrage of camera flashes. The mainstream media ate out of the palm of his hand. I stood near the front row, a crystal flute of champagne resting in my grasp, watching my husband bask in the intense adoration of over 300 billionaires, venture capitalists, and industry titans. I was perfectly content letting him play the charismatic face of our company, while I remained the silent, powerful architect in the shadows. He raised his hands, and a hushed, expectant reverence fell over the magnificent room. Thank you all for being here on this truly historic night. Nolan's voice echoed through the state-of-the-art sound system, smooth and dripping with artificial humility. Arascent is poised to completely change the world as we know it. We are projecting revenue in the hundreds of millions by the end of Q4. The entire crowd erupted into deafening applause. I smiled, feeling a profound surge of immense pride wash over me. But then, Nolan slowly lowered his hands, and his expression drastically shifted. The warm, highly practiced smile vanished from his face, abruptly replaced by a chilling, somber seriousness. However, Nolan continued, his voice dropping a full octave to command absolute attention, tonight is not just about the future of artificial intelligence, it is also about my personal future. A true leader must always be authentic, and I can no longer live a lie in front of all of you. I need to make a critical transition from my professional life to my personal life. The applause died instantly. A thick, suffocating silence violently blanketed the massive ballroom. I frowned deeply, setting my champagne flute onto a passing waiter's silver tray with a sharp clink. This was definitely not in the script we had agreed upon. We had meticulously rehearsed his keynote speech 20 times in our living room. My heart began to drum a frantic, highly irregular rhythm against my ribs. For far too long, I have been trapped in a marriage entirely devoid of true partnership and emotional connection, Nolan projected loudly, his cold eyes sweeping the vast room, but deliberately avoiding mine. A man needs a solid foundation built on fundamental truth and genuine love, and I have finally found that. A loud collective gasp rippled through the endless sea of elegantly dressed guests. The heavy television cameras pivoted frantically, lenses zooming in to capture his every word. My breath violently caught in my throat. I felt as though I had been violently plunged into a freezing ice bath. Nolan dramatically gestured toward the darkened side stage. I would like to introduce you to the beautiful woman who holds my entire future, Sienna Vance. From the heavy velvet shadows, a woman emerged into the blinding spotlight. She was stunningly gorgeous, wrapped in a clingy emerald silk gown that clung to her figure and left absolutely nothing to the imagination. But what immediately drew every single eye in the room was the undeniable, highly prominent curve of her stomach. She walked up the carpeted steps with a slow, calculated grace, gently placing a perfectly manicured hand over her very obvious baby bump as she stood firmly beside my husband. Nolan proudly wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her intimately close. "Sienna is carrying my child," Nolan declared loudly, his arrogant voice echoing off the high vaulted ceiling. "We are expecting a healthy baby boy in exactly 4 months. Because of this incredible blessing, I am officially announcing right here and right now that I am filing for divorce from Kylie Barnes, effective immediately." The enormous ballroom completely exploded into pure chaos. Aggressive journalists shouted overlapping questions, camera flashes erupted like a strobe light in an endless nightmare, and wealthy investors murmured to each other in absolute shocked disbelief. I stood frozen to the spot, my peripheral vision rapidly narrowing to a dark tunnel. My husband of 7 years had just publicly humiliated me, discarded me like utter trash, and proudly flaunted his pregnant mistress in front of the entire American media landscape. The sheer audacity, the meticulously calculated cruelty of choosing my company's launch and our wedding anniversary for this brutal execution physically knocked the wind out of my lungs. Pure adrenaline finally shattered my rigid paralysis. A burning rage, hot and totally blinding, surged violently through my veins. I marched aggressively toward the brightly lit stage, my expensive heels clicking sharply and rhythmically against the polished marble floor. I was going to march up those steps, rip that microphone straight from his lying hands, and tear his flawless, carefully constructed facade to absolute shreds. "Nolan!" I screamed at the top of my lungs, but my desperate voice was instantly swallowed by the chaotic, deafening roar of the frantic crowd. I swiftly reached the heavy VIP security barricade guarding the narrow steps to the stage. Bolted securely beside it stood the advanced biometric scanner I had personally programmed just 3 weeks ago. It was specifically designed to grant instant, unhindered clearance to top-level executives. I shoved my face directly in front of the high-definition lens, fully expecting the heavy glass barricade to drop out of my way immediately. Instead, the scanner emitted a harsh, painfully low buzz. The small LED indicator flashed a bright, angry red. "Access denied." The cold, automated voice chimed, perfectly crisp and clear over the surrounding din. "User profile completely deleted from the mainframe." I stared at the glowing red light in absolute, soul-crushing disbelief. The impenetrable system I built with my own 2 hands, the complex facial recognition algorithm I had written entirely from scratch, was actively rejecting its own creator. My supreme administrative privileges had been completely and systematically revoked. I lunged aggressively forward, forcefully grabbing the top of the barricade, but 2 massive, suit-clad security guards materialized out of thin air instantly, violently blocking my only path to the stage where Nolan was currently kissing his pregnant mistress for the flashing cameras. The horrifying realization hit me with the destructive force of a runaway freight train. This grand spectacle was not a sudden, emotional burst of truth. This was a coldly, meticulously planned corporate coup, and I had just been brutally locked out of my very own empire. The massive hands of the 2 security guards clamped down on my bare shoulders with bone-bruising force. They did not just block my path, they aggressively spun me around and began frog-marching me back down the velvet runner. "Ma'am, you need to exit the premises immediately." The taller guard growled directly into my ear, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. I was being physically thrown out of the very launch party I had funded with my own money. The sea of wealthy elites instantly parted, their sharp whispers buzzing like a hive of angry hornets. Hundreds of eyes bored into my back, stripping away every ounce of my dignity. I kept my spine rigidly straight, refusing to give the flashing cameras or the sneering crowd the satisfaction of a single tear. Even as the heavy mahogany doors slammed shut behind me with a sickening thud, severing me from the blinding lights of my own triumph. I practically threw myself into the driver's seat of my car, my hands shaking so violently I could barely grip the leather steering wheel. I stomped on the gas, tearing blindly through the neon-lit streets of the city toward our triplex penthouse, my sanctuary. The ultimate high-tech haven I had meticulously wired and programmed with my own proprietary security protocols. I sprinted out of the private elevator and slammed my right palm flush against the sleek biometric scanner mounted beside our reinforced steel front door. A harsh, descending digital beep mocked me in the quiet hallway. The high-definition screen flashed a solid, unforgiving red. "Access denied," the synthesized voice stated flatly. I frantically wiped my hand on my dress and tried again. I pressed my thumb against the secondary reader. I leaned in for the retinal scan. Nothing happened. My entire digital footprint, my biological identity within the network I created, had been surgically scrubbed from the mainframe. I was officially a ghost at my own front door. "It is no use, Kylie. The system has been completely reset," a voice echoed from the shadowy corner of the corridor. Out stepped Marcus, Nolan's ruthless corporate attorney. Looking impeccably smug in a perfectly pressed gray suit, he held a thick manila folder tightly against his chest. "Good evening," he said, his tone entirely devoid of any human empathy. "Nolan anticipated you might try to return here to cause a scene. I am formally serving you with an immediate restraining order regarding these residential premises and the corporate headquarters." He shoved the heavy folder into my numb hands. I stared at the legal seal, my brain struggling to process the sheer velocity of the betrayal. "You cannot do this," I managed to say, my voice sounding hollow and foreign. "I own half of Oricent. I am the sole creator of the core algorithm." Marcus offered a chilling, predatory smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "I highly suggest you review page 42 of the corporate restructuring packet you signed exactly 6 months ago." I flipped open the folder under the dim overhead light, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon until they locked onto my own signature. There it was, buried deep within a supposedly routine tax document that Nolan had practically begged me to sign while I was in the middle of a grueling 72-hour coding marathon. I had been operating on zero sleep, completely exhausted, and completely trusting of my husband. That single signature was a complete, irrevocable surrender of my founder's equity, my intellectual property rights, and my voting power. I had blindly handed him the absolute keys to the kingdom. "You see, Nolan is currently executing a massive merger," Marcus continued, clearly relishing the moment. "The board of directors has fully approved a total buyout by Vance Enterprises." The name hit me with the physical force of a sledgehammer. Vance. Sienna Vance. The pregnant mistress standing triumphantly on the stage. Suddenly, all the jagged, confusing puzzle pieces snapped together with terrifying, blinding clarity. Sienna was not just a random homewrecker or a passing fling. She was the younger sister of Declan Vance, the ruthless billionaire venture capitalist who served as Arson's lead investor. This entire nightmare was never a sudden romance. It was a highly orchestrated, hostile corporate takeover cleverly masked as a tragic marital scandal. Nolan was actively plotting to sell my entire life's work, my revolutionary algorithm, directly to his new brother-in-law's conglomerate for tens of millions of dollars. And they had legally and systematically stripped me to the bone so I would not see a single red cent of the profits. Marcus turned sharply on his heel and walked toward the waiting elevator. "Nolan has generously transferred $2,000 to your personal checking account to help you transition into your new reality." He tossed over his shoulder casually. "Do not contact him again, or you will be arrested for violating the injunction." The elevator doors slid shut. I stood completely alone in the cold hallway, clutching a useless stack of papers. I was locked out of my home, legally stripped of my company, and discarded like worthless garbage by the man I loved. I drove aimlessly for over 2 hours, the city skyline fading into dark, empty stretches of highway. Finally pulling into the cracked asphalt parking lot of a rundown motel. The flickering neon vacancy sign buzzed relentlessly outside the grimy window of room number 12. I sat heavily on the edge of the sagging mattress, staring blankly at the peeling yellow wallpaper. I had exactly one backup laptop in my trunk, the evening gown on my back, and a bank account practically at zero. But as I sat there in the suffocating, damp silence of that cheap room, the crushing weight of despair began to slowly curdle into something else. The blinding pain mutated, crystallizing into a cold, sharp, and intensely focused fury. Nolan Hayes thought he had successfully deleted me from the narrative. He thought his trap was flawless. But he forgot that I am a master architect. I write the rules. And staring at the digital clock flashing on the nightstand, a dangerous, consuming fire ignited in my chest. I was going to burn his entire stolen empire right down to the ashes. The morning sun was barely bleeding over the horizon when I pounded on the heavy oak door of a rundown apartment in Oakland. I had driven for 45 minutes straight, running entirely on pure adrenaline and cold fury. The door creaked open to reveal a very confused and heavily sleep-deprived Elias. He was my former lead systems engineer, a brilliant coder who had quit Oricent exactly 8 months ago because he could no longer stomach my husband's toxic, credit-stealing management style. "Kylie, what on earth are you doing here at 6 in the morning?" Elias rubbed his tired eyes, his bewildered gaze dropping to my wrinkled, expensive evening gown. "I need your primary rig, Elias, no questions asked, and I need a secure, untraceable proxy routed through at least 3 different offshore servers." He studied my face for exactly 2 seconds before stepping aside in total silence. He knew me well enough to recognize a warpath when he saw one. I bypassed his messy living room and went straight to the dark bedroom setup. His custom-built machine hummed with quiet, raw power. I cracked my knuckles and hovered my trembling hands over the mechanical keyboard. It was time to hunt. Nolan and his highly paid corporate lawyers assumed that locking me out of the main servers meant I was completely blind and helpless. They were profoundly arrogant. When you build a massive house from the foundation up, you always remember to leave a spare key under the mat. 5 years ago, during the very first week of writing the core architecture, I established a parallel shadow network. It was an invisible, read-only ghost server that perfectly mirrored every single byte of data passing through Oricent. It required absolutely zero biometric clearance because it did not technically exist on any official company schematic. I typed furiously, bypassing 12 layers of basic encryption as if they were wet tissue paper. Within 15 minutes, I was swimming through the deepest, darkest confidential files of the company. My first target was the highly rushed merger agreement. Nolan was moving at breakneck speed. The internal documents indicated he planned to finalize the massive transfer of all corporate assets to Vance Enterprises within exactly 72 hours. He was desperately trying to liquidate the entire company and hide the hundreds of millions in an offshore shell corporation before our official divorce proceedings could even begin. But I needed to understand the enemy. I initiated a deep web sweep on Sienna Vance. The mainstream media knew her as a glamorous socialite and the wealthy younger sister of a billionaire investor. The digital underground told a completely different, highly sinister story. I unearthed a heavily encrypted folder from a private investigator hired by a rival firm 2 years ago. Sienna was not just pretty eye candy, she was a highly trained corporate assassin. Over the past 6 years, she had systematically seduced, infiltrated, and utterly destroyed 4 different promising tech startups in Silicon Valley. Her method was absolutely flawless. She would target the weak link, usually an ego-driven chief executive officer, manipulate them into a legally vulnerable position, and then allow her brother's conglomerate to swallow the intellectual property for pennies on the dollar. Nolan was not a tragic victim of true love. He was just mark number 5. My fingers danced aggressively across the keys, digging deeper into her private, supposedly deleted communications. I intercepted a string of heavily guarded medical emails routed from an exclusive private clinic in Beverly Hills. I cracked the administrator password in under 3 minutes. The prenatal file loaded onto the bright screen, and I leaned in close, my eyes rapidly scanning the clinical data. The ultrasound images confirmed the pregnancy was absolutely real. There was a healthy fetus developing. However, my eyes locked onto the estimated date of conception. I calculated the precise timeline backward, double-checking the exact weeks and days. The math was brutally clear. The conception occurred exactly 14 weeks ago, but Nolan had been on a highly publicized 2-week philanthropic tour in Southeast Asia during that exact window. I remembered it perfectly because I had managed the entire company single-handedly while he was gone. It was physically and scientifically impossible for Nolan to be the biological father. He was proudly parading another man's child in front of the entire world, completely oblivious to his own profound humiliation. A dark, triumphant laugh escaped my lips, echoing loudly in the quiet apartment. Elias peered into the room, holding 2 mugs of black coffee, but I waved him off. My mind was racing, clearly visualizing the beautiful, catastrophic trap they were eagerly walking into. Nolan was thoroughly convinced he held all the winning cards. He believed he had successfully stolen my life's work and secured his billionaire status. What my foolish husband did not know, what no one on Earth knew, was that the core algorithm of Oracent had a heartbeat only I could control. On day 1, I had buried a highly complex, dormant auto-destruct sequence deep within the foundational code. It was a fatal failsafe, a kill switch cleverly disguised as a simple line of diagnostic routine. The exact moment I triggered it, the entire system would cannibalize itself, permanently erasing the predictive models and turning the revolutionary software into a massive pile of useless digital garbage. I leaned back in the heavy leather chair, a cold, calculating calm washing over my entire body. I could easily leak the medical files right now. I could expose Sienna to the hungry press and humiliate Nolan before the ink even dried on his precious contract. But that was far too merciful. A quick, painless death was simply not enough for the man who tried to erase my entire existence. I closed the terminal, systematically wiping every single trace of my digital footprint from Elias's machine. I made my absolute, final decision. I was going to wrap myself in total, unbreakable silence. I would step back into the dark shadows and patiently let them sign the legal papers. I would let them pop the expensive champagne and celebrate their monumental theft. I would let Nolan climb to the absolute highest peak of his false empire, because the higher he climbed, the more bones he would shatter when I finally pushed him off the edge. Exactly 48 hours after my unceremonious exile, my burner phone buzzed violently on the cheap motel nightstand. The caller ID was a blocked number, but I knew exactly who it was. I cleared my throat, forcing my voice to sound raspy and thoroughly defeated, before answering. "Hello?" I whispered. "Kylie," Nolan replied. His voice was dripping with that sickening practiced sympathy he used on nervous investors. "I am calling because despite everything, I still care about your well-being. I want to offer you a way out of this mess without making it ugly for either of us." "A way out," I choked out, forcing a pathetic sob into the receiver. "You took my entire life, Nolan!" "I took what was rightfully mine," he corrected sharply, his facade slipping for a fraction of a second. "But I am willing to be generous. Marcus has drafted a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. You sign it, you hand over your final administrative clearance tokens, and you promise to disappear quietly. In exchange, I will wire $50,000 to your new account. It is more than enough for a fresh start." $50,000. He was offering me $50,000 for a company valued at over $300 million. The sheer insult of it made my blood boil, but I ruthlessly suppressed the anger. I needed him completely blind to my true intentions. I let out a loud, shuddering wail, making sure the phone picked up every pathetic frequency. "Please, Nolan, you cannot do this to me. I have nothing left. Please just give me my job back. I will work under you. I will not say a word about Sienna. Just do not take my code away." "Stop crying, Kylie. It is pathetic." He sighed heavily, sounding immensely irritated but profoundly satisfied by my total submission. "The deal is done. You either take the severance package or you get absolutely nothing. We can finalize this today." "Okay," I whimpered softly. But I need to see you. Just one last time. Face to face. Meet me at the corner cafe near the old office at exactly 2 o'clock this afternoon. Bring the papers. I will sign whatever you want." He hesitated, likely weighing the risk of a public scene against the convenience of wrapping up loose ends. "Fine. 2 o'clock. Do not try anything stupid." I arrived at the bustling coffee shop exactly 15 minutes early. I secured a small, quiet booth in the far back corner, intentionally facing the window so the bright afternoon light would silhouette my face and mask my expressions. Beneath the collar of my simple black blouse, a state-of-the-art micro-recorder was taped securely over my collarbone, its battery fully charged and actively recording. Nolan walked through the glass doors right on the dot, flanked by an invisible aura of pure arrogance. He was wearing a ridiculously expensive Italian suit, a solid gold watch gleaming on his wrist. He looked like a man who had already conquered the entire universe. He slid into the booth across from me, tossing a thick legal document onto the polished wooden table. "Sign it," he commanded, not even bothering to order a drink. I kept my head down, staring at my trembling hands, playing the role of the broken wife to absolute perfection. "You look incredibly happy, Nolan." "I am," he gloated, leaning back comfortably. "Sienna is everything I ever needed. She comes from true pedigree. Her brother Declan and I are going to take Arisent global within 18 months. We are talking billions. Kylie, we have a massive mansion picked out in the hills, and my son will be born into absolute royalty." I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste copper. "It is my algorithm. Nolan, you know that. You are selling my genius to her family." Nolan laughed, a cold, mocking sound. "Nobody cares who laid the bricks, Kylie. They only care about the architect who sells the building. You were always just a basement coder. You lack the vision. You lack the charisma." I sniffled loudly, picking up a pen with a shaking hand. "But you do not even understand the core architecture. If the servers crash, you have absolutely no idea how to reboot the predictive models. You cannot even read the base Python scripts. I do not need to understand a single line of your nerdy little code." Nolan scoffed loudly, leaning forward, completely taking the bait. "I am the chief executive officer. I hire people to understand the code. Your entire algorithm is just a machine running in the background while I make the real money. I have not looked at a single string of data since we launched, and I never will. I just own it." "Got it." His arrogant, crystal-clear confession of total technical incompetence was now permanently burned onto my hidden audio drive. "You are right," I whispered, pulling the heavy contract toward me. I flipped to the final signature page, but before my pen touched the paper, I slid a single, officially formatted addendum sheet from my purse and placed it squarely on top. I had a public defender look at the terms. "I will sign your non-disclosure agreement and walk away forever, but I need you to sign this single release of liability." Nolan frowned, picking up my sheet. "What is this?" "It just legally states that as of this exact minute, I am permanently relieved of all system maintenance responsibilities." I lied smoothly, keeping my eyes wide and innocent. "If I am no longer an employee, I cannot be held legally or financially responsible if your new engineers accidentally break the legacy code. It is just standard technical severability." Nolan skimmed the dense paragraph, his eyes glossing over the intricate legal phrasing I had carefully drafted to make it look incredibly boring. Blinded by his eagerness to get my final signature on his buyout papers, he carelessly scribbled his name on my addendum. I immediately signed his documents in return. The trap was set, locked, and legally binding. The very next morning, the financial news networks were practically vibrating with the massive breaking headline: "Vance Enterprises officially acquired Arisent Technologies in a monumental cash deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars." The television screen in my dingy motel room broadcasted live footage of the signing ceremony. Nolan, Sienna, and the ruthless Declan Vance stood together in a luxurious boardroom, holding up crystal glasses of expensive champagne. their faces plastered with victorious, greedy smiles. They thought they had won the ultimate war. They thought they had successfully buried me in the dirt. I watched their arrogant celebration while calmly sipping a cheap cup of instant coffee. The chessboard was perfectly set. It was finally time to flip the table. The grand handover ceremony was scheduled for exactly 10 o'clock on a bright Tuesday morning, down at the Orison Technologies headquarters. The massive glass conference room was undoubtedly packed with the most powerful men in the hemisphere. Declan Vance had flown in his top-tier billionaire partners, international hedge fund managers, and elite board members to witness the live demonstration of the newly acquired predictive algorithm. They had erected giant ultra-high-definition monitors to display the flawless data streams. Nolan would be standing at the head of the long mahogany table, wearing another custom-tailored suit, ready to officially transfer the master administrative keys. It was meant to be the crowning coronation of his fraudulent career. Exactly 3 blocks down the street, I was sitting comfortably at a small, sunlit table in an artisanal coffee shop. I had a chilled iced matcha latte in my left hand and my heavily modified laptop open on the table in front of me. The air was thick with the smell of roasted espresso beans and fresh pastries. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my drink. My eyes locked onto the black terminal window reflecting on my screen. I was currently connected to the shadow server, watching the live traffic data surge as Nolan initiated the startup sequence for his wealthy audience. The system was running at peak efficiency, churning through millions of data points per second. It was beautiful, and it was time for it to die. I rested my fingers lightly over the keyboard. I did not feel an ounce of hesitation or regret. I typed the final execution command. 7 simple keystrokes. I pressed the Enter key. The terminal window blinked once, and then the fatal injection flooded into the core architecture. It was not a clumsy virus or a loud, messy hack. It was a digital neurotoxin, elegant and perfectly silent. I watched via my shadow proxy as the foundational code began to rapidly cannibalize itself. The neural pathways of the algorithm snapped. The predictive models dissolved into meaningless strings of binary trash. The massive databases, holding years of carefully curated information, systematically purged themselves, wiping every single sector cleanly and permanently. Within exactly 45 seconds, a platform valued at over $300 million was reduced to an empty, corrupted void. The absolute chaos that must have erupted in that glass conference room was easy to imagine, but I did not have to wait long for confirmation. Exactly 2 minutes after the total system failure, my burner phone began to vibrate violently across the wooden cafe table. The caller ID flashed Nolan's name. I let it ring 3 times, savoring the moment, before calmly pressing the answer button and lifting the phone to my ear. "What did you do?" Nolan screamed. His voice was completely stripped of its usual smooth arrogance, replaced by raw, unadulterated panic. "The entire network just crashed. Every single monitor in the boardroom is flashing critical error codes. The mainframe is completely wiped clean. Fix it right now. Kylie, I swear to God, I will have you arrested and thrown in federal prison for cyber terrorism." I took another leisurely sip of my iced latte. "I have absolutely no idea what you are talking about. Nolan, I am no longer an employee of Orison Technologies. Remember? I am just a woman enjoying a lovely Tuesday morning." "Do not play games with me," he roared, the sound of panicked shouting echoing in the background of his call. "Get on a computer and reboot the backup servers immediately. Declan is losing his mind. You are legally bound by the transition contract to ensure a smooth handover." "Actually, I am not," I replied, my voice dripping with cold, sweet satisfaction. "I highly suggest you have Marcus read that little addendum you signed at the coffee shop yesterday. The one you barely skimmed. It explicitly states that I am permanently and irrevocably released from all system maintenance, troubleshooting, and liability. The exact second the ink dried, I am entirely immune from any legal action regarding the operational status of your software. You bought it as is. Nolan, if it broke, that is your problem." "You engineered this," Nolan gasped. his breath hitching as the devastating reality began to crush his chest. "You sabotaged the code." "I simply built a system that refuses to be stolen," I stated flatly. "You wanted to be the architect, Nolan, so fix your own building." I did not hang up. I kept the line open, listening intently to the beautiful symphony of his total destruction. Over the phone, I could clearly hear the heavy, furious footsteps of Declan Vance approaching. "What is happening, Nolan?" Declan barked, his voice vibrating with lethal billionaire rage. "My technical team just told me the source code is gone, completely vaporized. We just wired hundreds of millions of dollars into your holding accounts for a product that does not exist. It is just a temporary glitch. Declan, I promise," Nolan stammered pathetically, his voice trembling like a frightened child. "My engineers are fixing it right now. Just give me 1 hour." While Nolan desperately tried to patch the sinking ship with outright lies, I opened my secure email client. I attached the crystal-clear audio file I had recorded during our cafe meeting. The exact recording where Nolan proudly boasted about being completely technically incompetent and never looking at a single line of code. I typed Declan Vance's direct private email address into the recipient box. I hit send. I listened through the open phone line as Declan's smartphone chimed loudly in the boardroom. A few agonizing seconds of silence passed. Then, the sound of the audio recording began to play at maximum volume, echoing off the glass walls for every single investor to hear. Nolan's own arrogant voice filled the room, confessing his absolute uselessness and confirming he had zero understanding of the product he just sold them. "You lying, fraudulent piece of trash," Declan snarled, the sound of a heavy physical scuffle breaking out. Someone overturned a chair. "You do not know how to fix this because you never built it. You stole a hollow shell and sold it to my family." "Declan, please, wait, I can explain," Nolan pleaded, practically weeping. "Shut up," Declan roared, his voice cutting through the room like a machete. "I am calling the bank right this second. I am freezing every single financial asset connected to your name. I am reversing the merger funds, and then my lawyers are going to file federal charges against you for massive corporate fraud and grand larceny. You are going to rot in a concrete cell for the rest of your miserable life." I smiled softly, reaching across the table and finally ending the call. The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The empire of lies had collapsed, and Nolan was buried directly under the rubble. Exactly 3 hours after the catastrophic meltdown of the stolen network, the flimsy wooden door of my motel room rattled violently under a series of desperate, heavy pounds. I walked slowly across the stained carpet and unlocked the deadbolt. The door swung open to reveal the completely shattered remains of Nolan Hayes. The impeccably tailored midnight blue suit he wore just a day ago was ruined, the expensive jacket missing and the silk tie torn away. His hair was a damp, disheveled mess, and his eyes were completely bloodshot and wild with pure terror. Before I could even speak a single word, my husband of 7 years dropped heavily to his knees, right on the cracked concrete of the exterior walkway. "Kylie, I am begging you," Nolan sobbed, his voice cracking horribly as he reached out and desperately grabbed the hem of my simple jeans. "You have to save me. You have to write a patch to reverse the self-destruct sequence. Declan is absolutely insane. He has already frozen every single one of my bank accounts and revoked my passport. I have absolutely nothing left." I stared down at him, feeling absolutely nothing. The blinding rage that had consumed me for the past few days had completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, permanent glacier of indifference. "Get your hands off me, Nolan!" He flinched back but remained on his knees, tears streaming freely down his pale cheeks. "I know I was horrible. I know I betrayed you. But the pressure of Silicon Valley broke me. Kylie, I needed to secure a massive legacy, and you have to understand. I did it for my family. Sienna is carrying an innocent child. I have a son coming into this world in exactly 4 months. I cannot go to federal prison and leave my baby completely fatherless and destitute. Please, have some mercy for the baby." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh that echoed off the cheap brick walls of the motel. I turned around, walked calmly over to the small circular table, and picked up the thick manila envelope I had printed earlier that morning. I walked back to the doorway and threw the heavy stack of documents directly into his face. The papers scattered violently across the damp pavement. "Read the highly confidential medical files, Nolan," I commanded, my voice dripping with absolute venom. "Look at the highlighted dates of conception." Nolan shakily picked up a crumpled page, his tear-filled eyes scanning the black text. A look of profound, devastating confusion washed over his face. 14 weeks ago, but I was in Singapore. You were halfway across the globe on a highly publicized philanthropic tour for exactly 14 solid days, I stated, delivering the final, fatal blow. "It is biologically and physically impossible for you to be the father." I ran the encrypted background checks myself. "The actual biological father is the chief executive officer of our biggest technological rival. Sienna Vance is nothing but a corporate parasite. Nolan, she never loved you. She used her pregnancy to manipulate your massive ego, blind you to her hostile takeover, and feed my company directly to her brother. You were never the architect of a grand empire. You were just an incredibly gullible, pathetic pawn." The horrifying truth hit him with the destructive force of a massive earthquake. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving him looking like a literal corpse. He collapsed backward onto the dirty pavement, clutching his chest as he began to hyperventilate. The agonizing realization that he had sacrificed his devoted wife, his entire career, and his absolute freedom for a total lie completely broke his mind. "And while you were busy plotting my exile," I continued smoothly, stepping out into the cool evening air, "I was already 10 steps ahead. The foundational algorithm you tried to steal was an outdated prototype. Over the last 8 months, I secretly built a quantum predictive matrix that operates at 10 times the speed of the old software. I officially registered the global patents yesterday morning under my own independent corporation. I own 100% of the equity. You stole a rotting carcass, Nolan." While I walked away with the beating heart of the future, bright red and blue lights suddenly sliced through the dark parking lot. 2 heavy police cruisers sped off the highway and screeched to a halt right at the edge of the walkway. Declan Vance had not wasted a single minute. 4 armed officers stepped out, their heavy boots crunching against the asphalt as they marched directly toward the sobbing man on the ground. "Nolan Hayes," the lead officer barked, grabbing Nolan by the shoulders and violently hauling him to his feet. "You are under arrest for massive corporate fraud, grand larceny, and criminal conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent." Nolan did not even try to fight. He hung his head, entirely devoid of life, as the heavy steel handcuffs clicked sharply around his wrists. He did not look back at me as they shoved him roughly into the back of the cruiser. 24 hours later, I stood on the massive outdoor terrace of a towering skyscraper in the absolute center of the city, my new corporate headquarters. The city lights stretched out beneath me like a brilliant circuit board, pulsing with endless energy and limitless possibility. I took a deep breath of the crisp night air, completely shedding the heavy ghosts of my past. They tried to bury me in the dark, but they forgot I was the one who controlled the light. The era of Kylie Barnes had officially begun. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Violet Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.